Imagine playing World of Warcraft in a random dungeon, one where your group actually waits for you when you go AFK. World of Warcraft just made a huge change to their live game that's got me wondering, has World of Warcraft added a feature that will doom the game to be an antisocial mess? Okay, perhaps more of an antisocial mess. Or have they added a quality of life feature that will work as an alternative to the random dungeon grind that will provide solo and small group players an alternative to grouping up with random players who want to not take any time and actually they just want to experience the dungeon? Today we're talking about the new follower feature in World of Warcraft that was just added to the MMO in a limited fashion. Follower dungeons are essentially a new way to experience regular difficulty dungeons in World of Warcraft. You can queue up by yourself or with a party of up to 4 real players with the rest filled in by NPC followers that assist you in the dungeon. You can queue up through the dungeon finder right now and hop right in. Currently only the 8 starting dungeons from Dragonflight are available in the follower mode, starting at level 60, and there is a cap of 10 follower dungeons per day, something they may adjust in the future. Loot is the same as the normal dungeon and all loot goes to the players, not the followers. I was intrigued by this because it is a pretty sizable change, but I wanted to see how it would work out in practice, so I jumped in and gave it a shot. I logged in as perhaps the target audience for this update. I am not max level and I haven't experienced as much of Dragonflight as I'd like. I'm also coming off a review where I criticized the rush of ESO dungeons, which put story and environment on the back seat. But I am also someone who should probably hate this as a strong proponent of social grouping in MMOs. The reward from working together to achieve something is something that I highly value. But when looking at WoW, social grouping at the lowest tier, which this impacts, normal dungeons, is often less about meeting and playing with others and more about, well, rushing to the end and grinding gear and experience until you can get to the higher tiers like Heroic and Mythic. Before I went into this, I was really hoping for, I guess, 2 things. A limited experience that wasn't too disruptive to the game, and one that would allow experiencing the dungeons for players that may not want to rush, experiencing the mechanics and the story, but also something that would be adaptable to adding in more real players if you wanted to. I guess that might be 3 things. I didn't count very well. The dungeon experience starts out pretty good. You have the option to either lead the way or have them lead for you. They'll provide you with tips as you go through the dungeon, not a ton of them, but just a few of them, but that doesn't mean that they're infallible or overpowered. In fact, we wiped pretty quick when the takeover pulled.
I need to get closer. It's too far away.
There just wasn't as much finger pointing after the wipe as you would normally get with a normal dungeon. Although it was probably my fault. More on that in a sec. One thing I wish you could do, which I didn't see as an option for, was to add people into the follower dungeon afterwards, after you have started. Say your friend logs in and you want them to join you and be able to replace a follower. Well, you can't. Currently that doesn't seem to be an option, unless I just straight up missed it. It's something you would have to decide before you actually start the dungeon. Follower mode is a low-stress way to experience the care that goes into WoW dungeons. The dungeon basically works like a normal dungeon, just with followers that are a bit more sticky and tied to you. They do the things you expect them to do. They heal, they tank, they DPS, they just do it all a little bit worse. And they do it all with you leading the way or quickly following. Follower mode is a low-stress way to experience the care that goes into WoW dungeons. While I've never been a huge fan of massive groups of creatures that you mow down, I've always loved the boss fights and how epic they look and feel. Getting to experience that without rushing to maximize the potential gains from a dungeon actually felt kind of good. It really made me start thinking of running a dungeon like this with 1, 2, or 3 other real people, and just taking our time with the benefit of followers to make it doable, if not optimal. So I think I want to point that out here. Doing this solo actually made me think more of small group content and less of doing it solo over and over again. I feel like doing it solo would probably get pretty boring, but perhaps doing it with a friend or a couple friends might be a fun way to go about it, if not completely optimal. Speaking of not optimal, I wanted to test if the group would solo things without you. And yes, they will, but they did have significantly more difficulty just clearing out trash. The group does need you to be successful, and the more involved you are, the faster and safer it will be. Though of course, that doesn't mean you're always safe when you are in the midst of it. It doesn't save you from being bad at the game. It's me. I'm the problem. It's me. The dungeon definitely took a lot longer than a normal dungeon would with people, largely because I was taking it slow, also because it felt like tanking, DPS, and healing were all a little bit worse than real players, as they freaking should be. So will this be disruptive? Well, undoubtedly, but perhaps less so than other major changes WoW has made in the past. It'll certainly be less disruptive than, say, the random dungeon finder. I think my enjoyment of this mode can't be removed from those prior disruptions. Since the dungeon finder was brought into WoW, random dungeons have increasingly become a sprint, especially in normal mode, which for many players is just a runway to heroic and later mythic. Those two modes, it should be noted, are not eligible for follower dungeons, and honestly, I think that's how it should stay. But past experiences tell me it might not. WoW is known for expanding these things over time, but at least we can cross our fingers, right? Single-player dungeons are not new to MMOs. EverQuest 2, Star Wars: The Old Republic, and many more all have single-player versions of dungeons, and I see this WoW mode as just another iteration of that, a lesser dungeon. WoW is helped by having those extra difficulty levels in place. If this was introduced as a mode that allowed AI to replace players in heroics and mythics, I think you would see more outcry, and I personally would probably be a bit more upset about it. For this to remain a helpful addition to WoW, but one that doesn't fully disrupt the current flow, it essentially needs to remain as is. Well, again, a less optimized way to experience the story and group content you get early on. A less optimized way to get a little bit of gear and experience from what essentially amounts to a really cool quest. Blizzard will need to resist its worst impulses. Keep followers weaker than your average player and do not expand it into heroics and mythics. Doing so would hamper the last bastions of grouping within WoW, a game that has for a decade and a half or more chipped away at the sort of need for a group, or even to communicate in groups. I mean, when was the last time you communicated with your group mates in a random dungeon in World of Warcraft that was not a heroic or mythic? Even with normal dungeons, it doesn't feel like follower dungeons are going to replace the normal random dungeon run because, again, it's not as optimized. It may kind of like spread it a little bit further apart. So you may have the players that are using the random dungeon finder are really interested in optimizing because you get more bonuses from that. I didn't see the same kind of random dungeon bonus you normally get in WoW. And obviously, again, it's much slower. So I think that it's still probably spread it out a little bit. The people that want to go slower are probably going to start using follower dungeons more, while the people that want to rush through and optimize are probably going to be using the random dungeon finder, as they have been for years. My final thoughts are essentially that I'm surprised at how much I liked it, and I think that comes from where it's coming from. If this was a mode that was in WoW Classic or Season of Discovery right now, I don't think I would be happy about it at all. Those games still encourage you to group. They still encourage you to interact with people. And again, please, Blizzard, don't cross-contaminate with this. But it's one of those things where it's replacing a mode that already is antisocial. Normal dungeon, random dungeon finder doesn't really feel like a social thing. You get social when they get harder, when you actually have to communicate and work with each other. And normal dungeons usually, even with low items, tend to not be. And this just kind of like plays into that a little bit. But I want to know what you think. Is this the end of WoW? Is it a terrible thing that they added, or is it just another thing that's, you know, continuing the path that WoW set itself on a long time ago? What do you think? Would you like something like this in your MMO that you currently play, or would this make you quit that MMO? I'm very curious to hear what you have to say and what you think about it, so let us know down in the comment section below. My name is Redbird Flynn. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.